Amen. Okay, so I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's Sahaja Yoga program. And that was music by John Brown about 500 years ago. It was written. It's O Regina Mundi Clara, which begins in English. O radiant Queen of the world, throne of God, stairway of heaven, door to paradise. So tonight I thought I'd begin with a talk about one of William Blake's longer prophetic poems, Milton, and talk about it in a way that I hope will be useful to us in Sahaja Yoga. Shri Mataji talked so much about Blake, mentioned him so much. I feel it's important to try to grapple with his meaning, the meanings he composed in poetry and in painting. So I'll talk for about 20 minutes or so. I'll try and keep it to the point. One could talk for hours about Milton. And then we'll have an extract from a talk by Shri Mataji, and then we'll have some music and meditation. Blake wrote 3 really substantial epic poems, Vala, which he never completely finished, Milton, and Jerusalem, in that order. Milton, the one I'm going to concentrate on, refers, of course, to John Milton, the poet, who lived about 150 years before Blake. And he's most famous, of course, for Paradise Lost, which he wrote by the time he'd gone completely blind. He's a poet who divides the critics, as they say, but for a long time, he was considered the #1 English poet on a par with, or even superior to his predecessor, Shakespeare. In his youth, Blake found Milton's work absorbing, and in a letter to his friend for a time anyway, the sculptor John Flaxman, Blake says, "Milton loved me in childhood and showed me his face," which we can take either literally or imaginatively. But just as Blake did with Dante, whose Divine Comedy he illustrated in his last years, he came to be critical of Milton's philosophy. For Milton, wrote Blake, the Father is destiny, the Son a ratio of the 5 senses, and the Holy Ghost a vacuum. In other words, in Paradise Lost, Milton presents God the Father as a thoroughgoing authority figure, as imposing an unchangeable fate on human beings, and representing inflexible justice. He presents Jesus as a limited material human figure, and the Holy Spirit doesn't feature at all. So on the one hand, Milton is the hero of Blake's poem. On the other hand, he's shown as coming back to the world from eternity to put things right, both personally and collectively. The whole poem is an image, or a series of images contained within an image, which can be looked at in many ways and has many functions. Blake is hard to understand. I think that's fair to say, especially in these longer poems. We can quite easily get the gist of what he's saying, but once you start looking at it in more detail, even the gist that we thought we had shifts out of focus. And it's difficult. So what I want to do here is try to elucidate something of his main concerns and general approach in Milton. If we look at the preface to Milton first, this is a brief introduction in prose, to which he adds the short poem in 4 stanzas, which we know today as Jerusalem, to which in the middle of the First World War, Hubert Parry put his marvelous music. Blake begins with a statement. to justify the ways of God to man. This comes straight from Milton himself. So he's declaring that he's continuing Milton's work. Then he attacks the way, this is to quote, the stolen and perverted writings of Homer and Ovid, of Plato and Cicero, which all men ought to condemn, are set up by artifice against the sublime of the Bible. This brings in one of Blake's central themes, the distinction between imagination and reason or rationality. So if we get this, then it really helps us to approach Blake in, I think, and others think, the right way. By imagination, Blake means something very different from fantasy, daydreaming, and so on. He never really makes this explicit, but it's clear that it must be so. In the same letter to John Flaxman, where he talked about Milton showing him his face, he mentions Paracelsus also appearing to him. And Paracelsus, who was a Swiss physician in the Renaissance, warned against a confusion between the work done by imaginatio vera, true imagination, and mere fantasy. So for Blake, imagination, true imagination, means reality itself. The imagination is not a state, it is the human existence itself, he says in Milton. Imagination is the divine humanity, he says in Jerusalem the epic, not the short one that we sing. It is Jesus, the imagination is Christ. In our language, our Sahaja language, we would say probably that the imagination is the spirit, or it's the collective unconscious, or it's both. In truth, for Blake, everything in truth is imagination. And the fact that this does not appear to be so, and that on the contrary, we are trapped in a material body in a material world, is all a delusion, ultimately, a Maya from which we have to awaken, and he's trying to wake us up, at least to the idea that this is so. Close to this opposition between imagination and reason are two other opposites, inspiration and memory. In his preface to Milton, using phrases of Milton's, Blake talks about the daughters of memory and the daughters of inspiration. Both are muses, but the daughters of memory are only recycling ideas and images that already exist and which are therefore being remembered. It's a kind of postmodern idea, really. Whereas the daughters of inspiration are channeling living imaginative images to artists and scientists and others from the collective unconscious, from God. Okay, so the story in Milton is quite hard to follow and doesn't unfold in a strictly linear manner. This is one of the things that makes Blake quite hard to understand, especially in these prophetic works. Another is his complex mythology, together with the fact that he was developing this mythology over time, so it sort of shifts a bit as the poems go on. Much of this mythology, I'm just going to talk a little bit about it, which I think will be useful. Much of this mythology is concerned with the four zoas, or living creatures. These can be related to the creatures in Ezekiel's vision described in the Bible, and to four human faculties of perception and experience. So they're quite similar, these four zoas, to Jung's four faculties of sensation and intuition, reason and feeling. The two zoas with which Blake is chiefly concerned are Urizen, or Urizen, who represents reason, and Logos, who represents, if not quite intuition, then imagination. Logos is the prophet of eternity, Blake calls him. He's Blake's mythical hero, the one with whom he most identifies, and the only one of these four Zoas who doesn't get lost in illusion. To make things more complicated, these four Zoas have different names in time and in eternity, and so on. They also have emanations. These are their consorts, or Shaktis, or as Jung would say, animas. Loz's emanation is enithama. Then there's the way that Blake sometimes speaks literally and sometimes satirically. This adds to the difficulty of getting at his meaning. You know, you're not quite sure whether he really means that. When he's really sort of launching a broadside against Homer and Ovid and Plato and Cicero, it's not really, I think, that he's absolutely against these writers, but that he's just comparing them, saying they're nothing like the sublime imagination of the Bible. So finally, there's the fact that Blake is trying to communicate something very difficult. Oh, how can I, with my gross tongue that cleaveth to the dust, tell of the fourfold man in starry numbers, fitly ordered, he says in Milton. So anyway, Milton opens with a myth about Satan. It's a curious story in which Satan is presented to begin with as incomparably mild and believing in his own goodness. So he's not some terrifying, bug-eyed monster, not at all. What he is self-righteous. He's the sort of absolute self-righteousness. And it's because of this that he ends up declaring himself to be God alone. And his bosom grew opaque against the divine vision. And by making to himself laws from his own identity, he compelled others to serve him in moral gratitude and submission, being called God. That's a quote from Milton. So he's self-righteous to the extent that, or to the beyond the extent that he can accept any criticism. He is righteousness itself in his own view. And I think we see a lot of this today in our culture, this idea that certain people are on the right side of history, others are not on the right side of history, and therefore deserve to be erased or punished and so on. It's a very contentious and dangerous ground that people are walking on. Roughly speaking, then, in the epic, this Milton, someone is needed to deal with this new problem presented by Satan. But no one in the heavens wants to do it because it means, apparently, going to eternal death. Finally, Milton, the poet as hero, is very important, I think, to Blake that this should be so. He stands up and says he'll do it. And he says, I in my selfhood am that Satan. I am that evil one. The selfhood here meaning a composite of ego and conditioning. And accordingly, he's going to annihilate his selfhood. I say a composite of ego and conditioning because that's how we understand the selfhood as Sahaja Yogis. Now, actually, Blake is mostly concerned with the problem of the right side, which was beginning to develop exponentially during his lifetime through the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment and so on. Accordingly, quite a few Blake fans, especially arty types, see him as a sort of bohemian, antinomian, almost a tantrika in favor of free love and so on, pitting the body against the mind, against reason. This is a stupid idea because Blake is concerned with spiritual freedom above all, and to be limited to the body is to be even more limited than to be limited to the mind. Though he does, I mean, there are places certainly where he is satirizing the dryness of rationality by using the idea of the body against it. So Milton is coming in the poem to annihilate his selfhood, but that doesn't mean he's going to annihilate himself totally, not at all. And there's a beautiful description of how, when he enters into his shadow, which is the part of him, it's not really explained, but it's the part of him that is going to descend to earth to confront Satan. Himself, his real and immortal self, was, as appeared to those who dwell in immortality, as one sleeping on a couch of gold. And those in immortality gave forth their emanations like females of sweet beauty, to guard round him, and to feed his lips with food of Eden in his cold and dim repose. But to himself he seemed a wanderer lost in dreary night. I imagine that's how being in this world seemed to Blake quite often. Moreover, the seven angels, there are seven angels in the poem, they tell Milton, "Judge then of thy own self, thy earthly lineaments explore, what is eternal and what is changeable and what annihilable." And that's the task of us all, really, before and even more so after yoga. So, but it's also a further reason why Blake is difficult, because has such a compassionate and subtle attitude to his characters, and they all have these different aspects. So there's part of Milton that is eternal, the hero, and part that could be Satan, and part that is transformable, and so on. So it's very subtle. So Milton comes to earth. There's a beautiful couple of lines here. Now Albion's sleeping humanity began to turn upon his couch, feeling the electric flame of Milton's awful precipitate descent. And very curiously, Milton, when he arrives on earth, enters Blake's left foot. What are we to make of that? Now, there's another character in the poem who is important, and this is Ololon. She's Milton's emanation, and she's described as being sixfold, presumably because Milton had 3 wives over his lifetime and 3 daughters also. And with them, he had, from what the accounts we have of this, he had quite fractious relationships, difficult. Ololon, in the poem, holds herself responsible for driving Milton down into the ulro, which can be called a dimension of existence cut off from the divine vision, from the knowledge of God, from immediate truth, from imagination. This is mostly where our world is today. So we're in ulro. This is a great word, I think. And I mean, if I was just thinking today that if we see how our culture, the people who dominate our culture, the way it is presented to us, the BBC especially, I would say, how they've managed to take the Christ out of Christmas. I mean, it's an extraordinary achievement, what they've been able to do. But this is Aura, it's complete Aura. So Ololon also descends to play a part in Milton's redemption. She's associated with many things in the poem, not least with a 12-year-old girl who appears in Blake's garden in Felpham in Sussex one day. He was living in Sussex when he wrote Milton. Actually, this is a very rare reference to everyday recognizable reality in Blake's poetry. And I feel it must have brought forth a moment of inspiration for him. In fact, the whole poem can be seen as taking place within the moment in which the girl comes to his door. But I have to cut this short. So briefly, Blake sees in Milton's shadow the evil, and Milton sees it himself, the evil covering cherub. This is a curious name, which I talk about more in the Pearl of Wisdom. And within this covering cherub, which is very negative, Satan and Rahab. Rahab is the embodiment of the natural world as something negative that imprisons us in material life. In the selfhood deadly, Blake sees the wicker man of Scandinavia, in whom Jerusalem's children consume in flames among the stars. This idea of the wicker man stems from, as far as we know, a period when the Druids became corrupt and took to human sacrifice. And Jerusalem's children, Jerusalem is the spiritual side of Vala or Rahab. She's the spiritual world, the creation of the mother. Jerusalem is something like Shri Mataji, and her children are the great seekers. But Milton is strong, and he's discriminating enough to confront Satan, the Satan who's out there and the Satan which is a potential within himself. And he says, Satan, my spectre, that's another word for the ego in Blake. I know my power, thee to annihilate and be a greater in thy place. But he's not going to do that. He's going to sacrifice his selfhood according to the laws of eternity. Satan is furious. He comes in a cloud with trumpets and flaming fire, saying, I am God and judge of all, the living and the dead. Fall therefore down and worship me. He instigates a kind of false last judgment. Oleron and Milton meet, and Oleron in a way asks forgiveness for her behavior towards Milton. Milton addresses her in a great speech. This is very near the end of the poem, which is more or less a summation of Blake's life and work. And I'll give a little of it here, though I've cut out bits. To cleanse the face of my spirit by self-examination, to bathe in the waters of life, to wash off the not human, I come in self-annihilation and the grandeur of inspiration, to cast off rational demonstration by faith in the Saviour, to cast off the rotten rags of memory by inspiration, to cast aside from poetry all that is not inspiration, to cast off the idiot questioner who is always questioning but never capable of answering, who sits with a sly grin, silent plotting when to question, like a thief in a cave, who publishes doubt and calls it knowledge, whose science is despair, whose pretense to knowledge is envy, whose whole science is to destroy the wisdom of ages, to gratify ravenous envy that rages round him like a wolf day and night without rest. And on it goes. It's a very powerful mantra. Finally, the poem ends with a collective resurrection, a true last judgment. In a way, it's triggered by Oleron also sacrificing herself. Okay, so we'll listen now to an extract of a talk of Shri Mataji's about the ego.
war. But somebody said, then what about America? You see, in America, the people didn't face war so much. The stupidity that they have is sometimes surprising. That is the same thing, as I said, is the development of ego in a human being. Now, ego is the thing that makes you think about everything. For example, now, we have to, say, go from here to Birmingham. All right? So we think, now how will I go? Simple way is that I'll take a train or I'll take a car and go away. If there's no reservation needed, I will just jump into the train or go by the car. If the car is available, I'll go by car or by train. Finished. What is there to think about it? But no, then we must plan it out. I have programmed now. I have to go. You go to the station and find the train is not there because there was some accident, so train is not moving. So you are absolutely upset because you think that the train has gone, or what to do. In that upsetting, you do not even remember that you have a car and you have to go by the car. Now, that whole thing upsets you because you had plans to go by train and you had planned everything. Now you cannot reach there, and what will happen? Now you are sitting here and worrying about it. Another person who is spontaneous, what will you do? All right, depends on, I may go by train or by car, whatever I feel like at that time. He's sitting tight. So he goes to the train, sees if the train is there, if it is nicely, there's a space available, he gets into it. If the train is not available, all right, he comes home, takes his car and goes away. So now you have informed the people that you must meet at such and such place. That also is there, you see. So those people are running up down there and they will be there at the station. Now, what's the matter? Even if they are at the station, you can meet them at the station. You go by train and you can meet them. What is there to be that much upset about it? You see, you can always contact them. But the way we get upset, we have spoiled the complete program of going to Birmingham, which is a very beautiful program that we have got. We have to meet new people, we have to meet many people, we have to enjoy ourselves. That's all finished. Because we had planned something and it did not work out, we are finished. All these things make us a miserable person. And we are so miserable and so grudging and so boring that those who are next to you just get fed up of it and they say, now shut up. If you are not going to Birmingham, if you are not going, don't go, but don't eat my head now. It's a common experience of many. If this Mr. Ego, he doesn't want you to be happy. He doesn't want you to be relaxed. He all the time gives you ideas and tells you do this and do that and you must get it done and this is to be done and you better inform that person, be meticulous about it. And it will go to such details that anything fails, you are finished because your nerves are already finished and shattered. Anything, even a drop of inconvenience comes into you or even a feather of disturbance is there, you are finished. And so everybody is rattling, we have tensions, we have problems. Why? What is the advantage of doing all these things? No advantage, you know that. But then why do you do it? Because you have a big ego. It won't allow you to rest. Whatever you may try, it won't. So what is the solution of that? Morning till evening, ask for forgiveness from God. Pull your ears from both the sides and say, oh God, forgive me. Oh God, forgive me, and oh God, forgive me. So this balloon of ego goes down a little. Remember Him morning, evening, every time. Remembering Christ brings down your ego very much. He did everything that was possible that you should not develop your ego. Everything that was possible. He was born as an ordinary carpenter's son. Lived in the most ordinary conditions. Kept himself behind the whole scene. He could have been born as Roman emperor. He could have been anybody there. But no, he was born himself. You know that he took his birth in a place where Even ordinary people do not take their births. But there also the light was there. Wherever he was born, there was light and joy. And this is the thing we have to know, that we have lost the joy because we have forgotten God Almighty. When we forget Him, that He is love and He is joy, naturally joy is also forgotten. And then we see people are not at all happy. They have affluence, they have money, they have everything, but still they are not happy. All the time they are in such a mess that you don't know how to talk to them. If you say this word, they'll be angry. If you say that word, they'll be angry. They are not at all normal human beings. They are sick people, sick with their ego. It's a very simple thing, is to ask for forgiveness. But how many times do we do that? Not even once a day, not even once a month, not even once a year. Even on a Christmas day, if we could say, forgive us, O Lord, for whatever we have done so far, it will work out. But that day we must have champagne to forgive Him more. We must have gossips, and we must have all the arrogant things by the time it is the end of Christmas. This ego, the yellow side one, is the one that presses your superego too much. It does. It presses it so much sometimes that a person forgets that others are hurt by what they talk. On the contrary, they devise methods how to say things which are cutting, which are hurting, which are painful to others. They say such things. I mean, all the time if you see a person, say from a village, if he comes and sees, he'll think, are they quarreling or what are they doing? I mean, the whole discussion. Even in the parliament I was surprised. The way they talk to each other, no bull will treat another bull that way. See, even a dog normally does not bark at another dog. No animal in the world all the time is barking at its fellow man. No animal in the whole world, I can tell you this much. Only the human beings, if two people are there all the time, they are going ho, 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 all the time that way. How is it possible? His ego and her ego, or maybe both his ego, are dashing at each other. And there is a kind of a funny type of feeling that, oh, I have mastered the thing. I have got the thing. I have got the point. I have proved the point. But in that, I have lost everything that was so beautiful and so much joy-giving within me. Actually, a sensible person would receive it from the place where two people are having an argument. Argument is a sign of tomfoolery. I haven't seen any argument coming to any end whatsoever. If it is, then it's all right. But it never does come. Because if, say, you ask me questions, I answer. All right? If you do not like the answer, give it up. But if you argue with me still, and I argue with you, where will you end? Argument is not going to lead you to any knowledge, but a very terrible ego developing into you. The whole modern concept is ego-oriented. All Western countries are ego-oriented. They want to develop your ego and pamper it. There are so many other ways by which they do. Why I'm talking more about it? Because we are all supposed to be Western people and affluent people. We're supposed to be very wise and leading or misleading, I don't know, the developing countries. So we have to understand ourselves, where are we as far as our understanding of things are concerned. How ego is pampered within us is by a large-scale methods. They work on your ego throughout to have all these so-called enterprises. For example, to a woman they'll say, oh, you must have a waist like this, and you must have a face like this, and you must have, for a man you must have this kind of a body, and you should be Mr. Universe or you should be something. So the man starts working on it immediately. There are so many people I've seen running on the roads in this cold, I don't understand, like mad, and some of them are member of parliaments. The whole night they keep awake and the whole day they are running about. I say, what are you doing? What is the need to do this? To keep good health, you must do it. To keep good health, don't work like mad. Be a sensible and a wise person. Wisdom is to be sought, to keep good health, to be all right, and not this kind of mad, ego-oriented things. So then the one way is to excite your ego about your physics. Then there is ego about you must have a big car. You see, people try to show off their possessions. You have a big car, then they are going about.
Okay, so we will just focus on meditation now. Pretty will play some music, beautiful rag, and at 8 o'clock, perhaps you could fade it out and we'll finish. Okay, so there's nothing really to say, just put our attention to the spirit, leaving the ego, leaving the superego, just surrendering to the divine. Okay. Okay, I was intending the music to go on a little longer, but we'll, just to finish, as we're a bit early, I'll read some of this last part of Milton. This is where all along, well, I'll read what it says. So saying, the Virgin all along divided sixfold, and with a shriek dolorous that ran through all creation, a double sixfold wonder away from all along, she divided and fled into the depths of Milton's shadow as a dove upon the stormy sea. Then she reappears in a different form. Then as a moony arc, all along descended to Felpham's Vale in clouds of blood, in streams of gore, with dreadful thunderings, into the fires of intellect that rejoiced in Felpham's Vale around the starry eight. With one accord, the starry eight became one man, Jesus, the Saviour, wonderful. Round his limbs, the clouds of Oleron folded as a garment, dipped in blood, written within and without in woven letters, and the writing is the divine revelation. And I beheld the 24 cities of Albion arise upon their thrones to judge the nations of the earth. And the immortal four, in whom the 24 appear fourfold, arose around Albion's body. Jesus wept and walked forth from Felpham's Vale, clothed in clouds of blood, to enter into Albion's bosom. And the four surrounded him in the column of fire in Felpham's Vale. Then to their mouths the four applied their four trumpets, and them sounded to the four winds. Terror struck in the vale, I stood at that immortal sound. My bones trembled, I fell outstretched upon the path a moment, and my soul returned into its mortal state to resurrection and judgment in the vegetable body, and my sweet shadow of delight stood trembling by my side. Immediately the lark mounted with a loud trill from Felpham's Vale, and the wild thyme from Wimbledon's green and empurpled hills, and Los and Enitharmon rose over the hills of Surrey. Their clouds roll over London with a south wind. Soft Uthun, who is like Shri Mataji, pants in the vale of Lambeth, weeping o'er her human harvest. Los listens to the cry of the poor man, his cloud over London in volume terrific, low bended in anger. Rintra and Palamabron view the human harvest beneath. Their wine presses and barns stand open. The ovens are prepared, the wagons ready. Terrific lions and tigers sport and play. All animals upon the earth are prepared in all their strength to go forth to the great harvest and vintage of the nations. And that's the end. And on the back is written, on the back of a sketch, one of the designs is written, Father and Mother, I return from flames of fire, tried and pure and white. So, thank you all very much for listening to this program tonight. And of course, if you wish to meditate more, then please do. Jai Shri Mataji.